Leave it, Omega. That beast is worth more dead than you are alive. The shout tore through the blizzard behind Grace Whitmore, sharp enough to cut through the screaming wind, but she did not turn back. She could not. If she looked over her shoulder, if she saw the lanterns swinging between the pine trees or the dark shapes of the hunters closing in, her courage might finally break, and she had nothing left to spare. Snow buried the mountain road in white waves, swallowing every track almost as soon as she made it. Her boots sank past her ankles. Her breath came out thin and ragged. Across her shoulders, half draped over her back and half dragging through the snow, was the largest black wolf she had ever seen. He should have been impossible for her to move. He was heavier than any wolf from Silver Hollow, taller even in his weakened state, with fur dark as midnight and eyes that had opened only once, silver and strangely aware, before closing again beneath the storm. His warmth was fading. Grace felt it through her torn cloak, felt each shallow breath tremble against the side of her neck, and every time it paused too long, fear tightened around her heart. "Stay with me," she whispered, though the wind stole the words the moment they left her lips. "Please. Just one more mile." 1 more mile was a lie. Her cabin was farther than that, hidden beyond Frostpine Ridge where the trees bent low and the old creek froze solid in winter. On a clear night, she could walk it in less than an hour. In a storm like this, with a dying wolf tied against her back by strips of her own cloak, it felt like crossing an entire frozen world. Her palms burned from gripping the makeshift rope. Her shoulder ached so badly she could barely feel her left arm. But she kept moving, one step, then another, because the wolf had been alone when she found him beneath the broken ice, and Grace knew too well what it meant to be left outside while others stayed warm behind locked doors. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now, back to Grace. Only 2 hours earlier, Silver Hollow had slammed its meeting hall doors in her face. She had gone there for medicine, not for herself, but for a child in the lower village burning with fever. Derek Hale, the pack's beta, had looked at her pale cheeks, her worn gloves, the basket of herbs hanging from her arm, and smiled like cruelty was a winter sport. He tossed the medicine bag into the snow and told her to pick it up like the stray she was. The others watched through the golden windows. Some looked away. None opened the door. Grace had knelt in the snow, gathering what had not broken, telling herself that kindness did not become worthless just because cruel people laughed at it. Then the howl came from the forest. Low. Pained. Ancient. Every wolf inside the hall went silent. Grace heard fear behind the glass. Not concern. Not mercy. Fear. And because no one else moved, she did. Now the same pack that had refused to help a sick child was chasing her through the storm, not to save the wounded creature, but to claim whatever reward his body might bring. A lantern flared behind her, closer this time. "Grace!" Derek called, his voice muffled by snow and distance. "Drop the wolf and walk away. This is your only warning." Grace's knees buckled. She fell hard, catching herself before the wolf slid from her back. For a moment, she stayed there on her hands and knees, snow clinging to her lashes, the whole world reduced to cold, darkness, and the faint beat of life against her shoulder. The wolf stirred. Not much. Just enough for his muzzle to brush her hair, enough for a breath to warm her ear. In that breath, Grace thought she heard something impossible, not a growl, not a word, but a voice buried deep inside her mind, tired and distant. "Run." She closed her eyes, then slowly forced herself upright. "No," she whispered. "Not without you." Grace pulled the wolf forward through the whiteout, and every step felt like a promise her body was begging her to break. The storm had swallowed the mountain so completely that even the pine trees appeared only as dark blurs, leaning over her like silent witnesses. Somewhere behind her, Derek Hale and his hunters were still moving. Their lanterns came and went between the snow-heavy branches, little sparks of gold in a world that had turned blue and gray. Grace knew Frostpine Ridge better than they did. She had learned its hidden paths after Silver Hollow stopped letting her sleep within pack walls, after every warm room became a place where she was tolerated only until someone stronger wanted her gone. She had been 18 when they first called her a failed Omega. 20 when they took her name off the winter supply list. 22 now, with no mate, no pack mark, and no proper wolf song in her chest. Just a quiet pulse of instinct that told her where wounded things were hiding and how to keep them breathing a little longer. That was what her mother used to call it before the fire took her. A gentle gift, Laurel Whitmore had said, pressing Grace's small hands around an injured sparrow. Not every strength has teeth. Grace held on to that memory as the wolf's weight dragged her sideways. Her mother had been the last person who said gentle without making it sound like weak. In Silver Hollow, gentleness was useful only when it served the powerful. A healer could patch up warriors, soothe frightened pups, and sit beside the dying, but she was never supposed to stand in front of danger. Grace had broken that rule tonight. She had broken it when she left the meeting hall after Derek humiliated her. She had broken it again when she followed the terrible howl into the ravine instead of running from it. And she was breaking it now, with the black wolf's breath fading against her shoulder and the hunters closing in behind her. The medicine bag bumped against her hip as she moved, the broken glass inside softly clicking with each step. She thought of little Noah Barnes shivering under 3 quilts in his grandmother's cabin, waiting for the fever tonic she had promised to bring. She thought of the pack women watching from behind the meeting hall windows, their faces pale with guilt, their hands still. Grace had spent her life making excuses for silence. Fear made people quiet. Rank made people careful. Survival made people cruel in small ways first. But the storm did not care about rank. The cold did not care who had a proper wolf and who did not. Out here, every breath had to be earned. The black wolf shifted again, and Grace nearly stumbled when a low sound rumbled through him. Not a threat. Not pain exactly. Recognition, maybe. She tightened the strips of cloak around her chest and leaned forward. I know, she whispered, though she did not know what she meant. I am tired too. The wind opened for one brief second, and through the snow she saw the dark line of the old creek below. Beyond it, hidden in a stand of fir trees, was her cabin. Smoke would not be rising from the chimney because she had left in too much of a hurry to bank the fire, but there were blankets, dried herbs, a kettle, and the small iron stove her father had carried there piece by piece before Silver Hollow decided his orphaned daughter was a burden. Another shout cracked behind her. Closer now. Grace forced herself down the slope, half sliding, half falling, one hand gripping the rope around the wolf, the other reaching for branches to slow them both. Snow sprayed around her boots. Her ankle twisted, sending a flash of pain up her leg, but she bit back the sound and kept moving. The creek was frozen thick enough to cross, though the ice groaned under the wolf's weight. Grace stepped carefully, whispering a prayer to the moon she had not trusted in years. Halfway across, the wolf's head lifted. His silver eyes opened, clearer than before, reflecting the storm with a strange, almost royal sorrow. For one heartbeat, Grace forgot the cold. She forgot the hunters. She forgot that no ordinary wolf should look at her as if he understood the shape of her loneliness. Then the ice behind them cracked under distant boots, and Derek's voice rose again through the blizzard. Last chance, Grace. Move aside. Grace looked toward the trees where her cabin waited, then back at the wolf whose life was tied to hers by torn cloth and impossible choice. Her hands were shaking. Her lungs burned. But when she spoke, her voice was steadier than she felt. You should have left us both alone. The creek ice trembled beneath Grace's boots, but she did not move aside. Derek Hale stood 30 feet away with 2 hunters behind him, their lanterns shaking in the wind, their faces half hidden by scarves and falling snow. For a moment, none of them spoke. The storm filled the silence with its long white roar, and the black wolf beside Grace breathed so faintly that she had to look down to be certain he was still alive. Derek's gaze moved from her torn cloak to the wolf's dark body, then to the strange silver mark barely visible beneath the frost on its shoulder. His expression changed so quickly that Grace almost missed it. Not greed. Not anger. Fear. He knew something. The realization slid through her colder than the wind. That animal does not belong to you, Derek said, lowering his voice as if the trees themselves might be listening. Walk away and I will tell the council you got lost in the storm. Grace tightened her hand around the strip of cloth tied across her chest. You never tell the council anything unless it protects you. One of the hunters shifted uneasily. Derek's eyes hardened. You think one lonely Omega can decide what happens on Pack land? Pack land. The words nearly made her laugh, though there was no humor left in her. Silver Hollow had remembered its borders only when it wanted to keep her out, its laws only when they could be used against someone weaker. The night her mother died, those same laws had been recited over Grace's head while the elders divided what little her family owned. Her father's tools. Her mother's herb books. The warm room above the clinic where Grace had slept as a child. Everything had been claimed for the good of the pack, except Grace herself. She had been left with a cabin, a cracked stove, and the lesson that home could vanish while people were still standing inside it. The wolf made a small sound, and Grace's anger softened into fear. He was slipping away again. His fur was crusted with ice around the wound near his chest, where some kind of silver-tipped spearhead or broken charm had lodged deep enough to poison him without needing to do more. Grace had seen silver sickness before. It made even strong wolves weak, confused, feverish. But this was different. The metal carried symbols that pulsed. With a dull blue light, like winter stars trapped under glass. Derek followed her gaze and stepped forward. Do not touch that. Grace looked up. Why? His jaw tightened. Because you do not understand what you found. Then explain it. The wind pushed snow between them. Derek said nothing. That silence told her more than any answer could have. He had not come here because he thought the wolf was dangerous. He had come because he was afraid the wolf might survive. Grace bent slowly, keeping her eyes on him, and slid one arm beneath the animal's neck. The wolf's silver eyes opened again, unfocused but aware. The weight of his gaze settled on her with impossible sadness, as if he was trying to warn her from somewhere very far away. A whisper moved through her mind, weak but clear enough to steal her breath. Trust no one from Silver Hollow. Grace froze. The voice was not hers. It was deep, worn down by pain, and wrapped in a kind of command that made every instinct in her go still. Derek noticed. What happened? He demanded. Grace swallowed, then lifted her chin. He is coming with me. The hunter on Derek's left took a step back. Beta, maybe we should send word to the Royal Patrol. If that mark is what it looks like, quiet, Derek snapped. Too fast. Too sharp. The fear returned to his face, and Grace understood with a sick, steady clarity. Royal. The word opened something in the storm. Somewhere beyond Frostpine Ridge, beyond Silver Hollow's locked doors and small cruelties, soldiers might already be searching for this wolf. Not hunters. Not scavengers. Royal Patrol. Grace turned toward the dark line of fir trees and pulled with everything she had left. The wolf slid forward, heavy and barely breathing, but moving. Derek called her name again, no longer mocking, no longer amused. This time, there was panic in it. Grace, stop. She did not. The cabin was close now. She could see the broken fence post beside the path, the crooked shape of the woodpile, the small square window black against the snow. Her ankle throbbed with each step. Her fingers were numb. But the voice inside her mind had not disappeared. It lingered like the last ember in a dying fire, and when Grace reached the cabin door, she heard it once more, softer than before. "Little Omega, why would you risk yourself for me?" Grace shoved the door open with her shoulder and dragged him into the dark warmth of the only place that had never asked her to prove she deserved shelter. "Because I know what it feels like," she whispered, collapsing beside him on the wooden floor, "when everyone decides you are easier to abandon than save." The cabin swallowed Grace and the wolf in darkness, the storm hammering the walls as if the whole mountain wanted in. For several seconds, she could only lie on the floor beside him, cheek pressed to the cold boards, her breath shaking so hard it seemed louder than the wind. Then the wolf exhaled, faint and uneven, and Grace forced herself up. No time. Fear could wait. Pain could wait. She crawled to the stove, shoved in kindling with numb fingers, and struck a match 3 times before the flame caught. Orange light bloomed small and stubborn in the iron belly, throwing shadows across the single-room cabin, the shelves of dried herbs, the cracked wash basin, the quilt folded on her cot. Everything looked painfully ordinary beside the impossible creature stretched across her floor. He barely fit between the stove and the door. Snow melted from his fur in dark puddles. The strange silver symbols near his chest pulsed weaker now, but each pulse made his body tense as though the metal carried a winter colder than the storm outside. Grace grabbed towels, boiled water, and opened the medicine bag she had fought so hard to bring home. Half the bottles were broken. The fever tonic for little Noah had survived, along with willow bark, clean cloth, and a small jar of moon salve her mother had taught her to make before Silver Hollow called such remedies old women's nonsense. Grace knelt beside the wolf and hesitated only once. "I am going to help," she whispered, placing her hand near his muzzle so he could catch her scent if he was still aware enough to understand. "I know you are scared. I am scared too." His eyes opened at that, silver in the stove light, no longer wild, not gentle either, but watching her with the exhausted dignity of someone who had learned not to beg. Grace's throat tightened. She had seen that look in mirrors. Carefully, she cut away the frozen strip of cloth and brushed snow from the wound. She did not let herself think about how close the silver lay to his heart or how wrong the symbols felt beneath her fingertips. She focused on what could be done. Warm the body. Slow the poison. Keep him breathing. Her mother's voice returned to her in memory, soft and steady. A healer does not need permission from cruelty. Grace soaked cloth in warm water and pressed it around the metal, not pulling, not forcing, only coaxing the ice loose. The wolf's breath hitched. His paws shifted, claws scraping the floorboards, and the cabin trembled with the strength he still carried even near death. "Easy," Grace murmured. "I have you." Outside, voices rose through the storm. Derek and his hunters had reached the yard. A fist struck the cabin door. "Open up, Grace." The wolf's eyes sharpened. Grace felt the change before she understood it, a pressure in the air, deep and ancient, like thunder hidden under snow. The voice touched her mind again, clearer now, though still worn thin. "Do not let him enter." She looked at the door, then at the small wooden latch that would never hold if Derek truly wanted inside. Her cabin had never been a fortress. It had been a place for quiet survival, for patched blankets and dried lavender, for pretending loneliness was peace. But tonight, it held something Silver Hollow feared. Tonight, for the first time, Grace felt the difference between being alone and standing alone. She rose, took her father's old iron poker from beside the stove, and moved to the door. "Go home, Derek," she called. The laughter outside was short and cold. "That stopped being your home a long time ago, remember?" Grace's hand tightened around the poker, but her voice did not break. "Then you should have no reason to be on my porch." Silence fell. Not long, but enough for her to hear the wolf's breathing, the stove crackling, her own heartbeat finding a steadier rhythm. Derek spoke again, lower now. "You have no idea what you are protecting." Grace looked back. The wolf was watching her, and in his silver eyes she saw pain, warning, and something else she did not have a name for yet. Trust, maybe. Fragile as the flame in the stove. She stepped away from the door and returned to his side. Maybe not, she whispered, pressing the warm cloth against the silver mark as moonlight slipped through the frosted window, but I know what I am not doing. I am not handing you over to people who came here afraid you would live. The first board in the porch steps creaked, and Grace knew Derek had moved closer. She could picture him through the door, standing beneath the sagging roof with snow on his dark coat and impatience burning through his careful smile. He had always hated being refused by someone he considered beneath him. In the cabin, the stove snapped softly, sending thin warmth across the floor. The black wolf lay still, but the air around him had changed. It no longer felt like she was caring for a helpless animal. It felt like she was sitting beside a storm that had forgotten how to rise. Grace pressed the cloth around the silver mark again, watching the strange symbols flicker under the salve. They were not carved into his skin. They floated above the wound like cold light, each mark bending away from her touch as if her hands offended whatever spell had placed them there. Grace, Derek called from outside, his voice smoother now. Listen to me. I know you think you are doing something noble, but that creature is tied to matters far above you. Let the pack handle it, and I will make sure you are allowed back inside Silver Hollow before spring. The offer struck some old, tired place in her. For years, she had imagined hearing those words. Allowed back. A cot near the clinic. A bowl at the communal table. A name spoken without pity. The ache of wanting it surprised her so sharply that her eyes stung. Then the wolf's breath caught, and the wanting burned away. You threw medicine into the snow tonight, she said, not loudly, but the storm seemed to carry it. For a sick child. Silence answered. Grace continued working, her fingers steadier now. You made me kneel for it. A hunter muttered something outside, too low for her to catch. Derek's voice hardened. Do not make this about your pride. Grace almost smiled. Pride. They always named dignity as pride when it belonged to someone weak. She reached for her mother's old herb book on the shelf above the wash basin, its pages swollen from years of winter damp. Silver sickness. Binding marks. Moon fever. She turned pages with one hand while keeping the other near the wolf's shoulder. A passage near the back caught her eye, written in Laurel Whitmore's careful script beside an older printed text. Cursed silver rejects force, but yields to mercy freely given. Grace read the line twice, her pulse slowing around its meaning. Not strength. Not rank. Mercy. The wolf's eyes opened again, and this time the voice in her mind came with the faint shape of breath. You should not have had to learn courage this way. The tenderness of it hurt more than fear. Grace looked down at him. Neither should you. A heavy knock shook the doorframe. Enough, Derek said. Open the door, or we open it for you. The wolf tried to lift his head, but the effort shuddered through him and failed. Grace gently set her palm against his neck. Do not move. She did not know why she trusted that he could understand her. She only knew that he did. Outside, another sound cut through the wind, distant at first, almost lost beneath the storm. Hooves. Many of them. Fast. Derek heard it too, because the porch went suddenly still. Grace turned toward the window, where frost blurred the world into silver shadows. Beyond the trees, several lights appeared along the ridge, brighter and steadier than pack lanterns. They moved in formation. Not hunters. Riders. The Royal Patrol, she realized, and the breath left her body. The wolf's gaze sharpened with a flash of recognition. For the first time since she had dragged him from the ravine, something like hope entered the room. Then Derek shouted to his men, panic breaking through his control. We finish this before they reach the creek. Grace did not wait to understand what he meant. She grabbed the herb book, tore a clean strip from her sleeve, and pressed her bleeding palm against the silver mark before fear could talk her out of it. The symbols flared. Bright blue. Cold swept through the cabin so fiercely the stove flame bent low. Grace gasped, but she did not pull away. Her blood touched the cursed silver, and the light changed. Blue became white. White became gold. The wolf's body arched with a silent rush of power, not violent, not wild, but vast, filling the cabin until every shadow seemed to kneel. In Grace's mind, the voice rose clear at last, deep as midnight and warm as a hand reaching through the storm. You found me before my kingdom did. The golden light spread beneath Grace's palm like sunrise trapped under ice, and the cabin filled with a sound too quiet to be thunder but too deep to be only breath. The cursed symbols trembled. One by one, they loosened from the silver mark, lifting like frost from glass before dissolving into the warm air above the wolf's chest. Grace felt every change through her hand. The cold poison pulling back. The faint heartbeat strengthening. The strange, ancient power inside him remembering itself. Her knees weakened, but she kept her palm pressed down, afraid that if she let go too soon, the storm would take him after all. Outside, Derek's voice rose in alarm, but it sounded far away now, separated from her by more than wood and snow. Inside the cabin, there was only the wolf, the light, and the steady truth unfolding between them. This was not ordinary healing. Grace had soothed frightened animals before. She had eased fevers, warmed frozen fingers, and held the hands of elders when their breathing grew thin. But this felt as if something buried in her blood had finally found the door it was meant to open. The wolf's silver eyes locked on hers. For the first time, he looked fully awake. Not saved, not yet, but present. Aware. Watching her as if she had crossed a distance no one else had dared to cross. Who are you? His voice asked inside her mind. Grace gave a breathless, almost broken laugh. I was about to ask you the same thing. The corner of his muzzle shifted, and if a wolf could look amused while half frozen on a cabin floor, this one did. Then the door shook hard. The latch rattled. Grace flinched, and the golden light flickered. The wolf's eyes sharpened at once. Do not fear them. That is easy for you to say, she whispered. You are the size of a pickup truck. Another shove hit the door, but before the latch could splinter, the sound of hooves thundered into the yard. Voices shouted over the storm, firm and commanding, not panicked like Derek's men. Steel-edged lantern light swept across the window. A horn sounded once, low and royal, and everything outside went still. Grace turned toward the frosted glass. Through the blur, she saw riders surrounding the cabin, their dark cloaks marked with a silver wolf crest. The royal patrol had reached them. The porch boards creaked again, but this time the footsteps were measured. A man's voice rang out, deep and controlled. By order of the Lycan Crown, everyone step away from this house. Derek protested at once. This is Silver Hollow territory. That Omega is sheltering a dangerous rogue. The answer came back like winter iron. That is not a rogue. Grace's heart stopped for one beat. The wolf exhaled beneath her hand, and the last of the blue symbols cracked apart into gold dust. The silver mark dulled, no longer glowing, no longer feeding on him. Grace pulled her hand back slowly. Her palm should have hurt, but instead it tingled with warmth, as if moonlight had settled under her skin. The wolf shifted, gathering strength into his massive frame. The floorboards groaned beneath him. Grace moved to help, then froze when he rose on his own, towering in the little cabin, black for brushing the edge of the hanging herbs. He was still wounded, still trembling, but the helplessness was gone. In its place stood a quiet power that made the room feel too small. Outside, the man from the patrol spoke again, closer now. Your Majesty. Grace went cold all over. She looked from the door to the wolf, then back again, trying to make sense of the words. Your Majesty. Not Sir. Not Commander. Not Alpha. Your Majesty. The wolf lowered his head toward her, and the voice inside her mind softened, carrying a weight that made her chest ache. "I am Nathaniel Blackthorne." Grace forgot how to breathe. Every child in the north knew that name. The Lycan King. The Winter Crown. The Ruler Silver. Hollow toasted in public and whispered about in private. The monarch whose patrols crossed mountains, whose law could dissolve a pack, whose enemies feared his silence more than another man's rage. Grace stared at the black wolf in the firelit cabin, at the creature she had dragged through snow with torn cloth and stubborn hope. "I called you a beast," she whispered. His silver eyes held hers. "You called me worth saving." Outside, Derek's voice cracked with sudden fear. "Grace, open this door now." But Grace was no longer listening to him. The wolf turned toward the door, and the cabin seemed to bend around him, not because he demanded space, but because the world remembered who he was. Then, with the storm roaring behind the walls and royal guards waiting in the snow, Nathaniel Blackthorne stepped between Grace and the door as if the Omega who had carried him through death had become the first thing in the world he intended to protect. The cabin door opened before Derek could touch it again. Not because Grace unlocked it, and not because the latch gave way, but because Nathaniel Blackthorne stepped forward and the old wood swung inward beneath a pressure older than fear. Snow rushed across the floor in a silver sheet. Beyond the threshold, the royal patrol stood in a wide circle around the yard, their horses restless, their lanterns held high against the blizzard. At their center was a broad-shouldered man with a frost-gray beard and the silver wolf crest pinned over his heart. He dropped to one knee the instant he saw the black wolf. "Your Majesty," he said, voice rough with relief. Around him, every royal rider followed. Knees touched snow. Heads bowed. Grace stood behind Nathaniel with her torn sleeve wrapped around her palm, unable to move, unable to make the world fit itself back into what she understood. Only minutes ago, this cabin had been hers alone, a forgotten shelter at the edge of pack land. Now soldiers of the Lycan Crown were kneeling in her yard, and the wolf she had dragged over ice was being greeted as king. Derek had gone pale beneath the snow on his lashes. His two hunters stood several steps behind him, suddenly looking smaller than they had. "On the creek." "There has been a misunderstanding," Derek said quickly. "We found the creature near our border and were securing the area for the crown." The bearded commander rose slowly. His eyes moved to Grace, then to the torn strips of cloak still tied around Nathaniel's body, then to the faint gold light fading from her injured hand. "Is that what happened?" he asked. Grace opened her mouth, but no sound came. All her life, speaking against someone like Derek had cost her something. Food. Work. Shelter. A place in line. A winter blanket. She had learned to swallow the truth when truth had nowhere safe to land. Nathaniel turned his head just enough for his silver eyes to find hers. "You are safe to speak." The words entered her mind gently, not as a command, but as a door being opened. Grace breathed in. The cold air hurt her lungs. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, yet in the stillness every person heard it. They were not securing him. They were afraid he would survive. One of the hunters looked at the ground. Derek snapped, "She is a rejected Omega. She has no standing to accuse anyone." The commander's expression sharpened, but Nathaniel moved first. He stepped out onto the porch, still in wolf form, wounded but towering, black fur rippling in the storm. He did not growl. He did not need to. The yard fell into a silence so complete that even the horses seemed to hold their breath. Derek took one step back. Nathaniel's voice filled Grace's mind, but this time she knew he allowed the others to feel the weight of it, even if they could not hear the words. An Omega with no standing carried her king through a blizzard while ranked wolves argued over whether he was worth saving. Grace felt the truth of it move through the yard like heat beneath snow. The commander looked at Derek. "Where did you find His Majesty?" Derek's mouth opened, then closed. "Near the eastern ravine." "And why was no royal signal sent?" "The storm blocked communication." Our riders saw your lanterns from half a mile away, the commander said. Signals were possible. The second hunter shifted, trembling now. Beta Hale told us not to send one. Derek spun toward him. Be quiet. But. It was too late. The words hung in the air, visible as breath. Grace's heart beat hard, not with triumph, but with a grief so old it felt almost calm. Silver Hollow had not only abandoned a wounded stranger. It had hidden a king. Nathaniel lowered his head, and the moon slipped briefly through the breaking clouds, touching the crest on his shoulder. The mark of blackthorn flared, unmistakable, royal and bright against the dark fur. Every doubt in the yard disappeared. The commander faced Derek fully. By Crown authority, Silver Hollow will answer for this night. Derek's confidence cracked. You cannot take the word of a stray over a beta. Nathaniel stepped down from the porch and stopped between Derek and Grace. In the firelit doorway behind him, she stood small, exhausted, wrapped in a torn dress and a courage no one had ever crowned. The king's silver eyes narrowed. Then the voice came, not in Grace's mind alone, but aloud for the first time, deep, human, and unmistakably royal. She is not a stray. The words moved through the yard with the force of a bell, clear enough to make every bowed head lift and every guilty face go still. She is not a stray. Grace heard them, but for a moment they did not feel meant for her. Stray was the name Silver Hollow had given her so often that it had become stitched into the seams of her life. Stray when she came for rations. Stray when she waited outside ceremonies. Stray when children were told not to follow her into the woods, as if loneliness could spread by touch. Now the Lycan King stood between her and the pack that had taught her to shrink, and he spoke as though the word had never deserved to touch her. The air around Nathaniel shimmered. Moonlight slipped through the storm clouds, silvering the snow, and the great black wolf began to change. It was not frightening. It was quiet, almost sacred, like winter releasing the first breath of spring. His shape drew upward beneath a veil of pale light, the dark fur fading into a long black cloak edged in frost, the royal mark burning briefly at his shoulder before settling against his skin like a crown remembered. When the light dimmed, Nathaniel Blackthorn stood in the snow as a man, tall and pale from the curse, his dark hair damp with melting ice, his silver eyes steady despite the exhaustion carved into his face. Every royal guard lowered their head again. Grace should have looked away out of instinct, out of habit, out of every lesson Silver Hollow had pressed into her bones. Instead, she stared. Not because he was a king. Because beneath the power and the title, she still saw the wounded creature who had breathed against her shoulder and asked why she would save him. Commander Marcus Reed stepped forward and unclasped his heavy cloak, offering it to Nathaniel. The king took it, but he did not wrap it around himself. He turned back toward the cabin doorway where Grace stood trembling in the firelight and crossed the porch with slow, careful steps. Your hand, he said. His voice was human now, low and rough from the cold, yet gentler than anyone in Silver Hollow had ever used with her. Grace looked down. Her palm glowed faintly gold where her blood had touched the curse. It does not hurt, she whispered. That does not mean it should be ignored. He reached for her hand, then stopped before touching her, waiting. The pause undid her more than any grand speech could have. Powerful wolves took. Alphas ordered. Betas corrected. No one waited for Grace Whitmore to choose. She placed her hand in his. Nathaniel wrapped the clean edge of the royal cloak around her shoulders first, shielding her from the wind before tending to the wound with a strip of white cloth Marcus provided. His touch was careful, almost reverent, and Grace felt the yard watching in stunned silence. Derek made a strained sound. Your Majesty, she is manipulating this. Omegas like her know how to appear harmless. Nathaniel did not look away from Grace's hand. Harmless is what cruel men call mercy when they cannot understand it. Marcus turned toward the hunters. Search the eastern ravine and the Silver Hollow meeting hall. Find who carried cursed silver onto royal land. The two hunters nodded quickly, relieved to obey someone other than Derek. Derek's face tightened. This is an insult to our pack. At that, Grace finally found her voice. No, she said. Softly. The insult was leaving a child without medicine. The insult was closing the door on someone asking for help. The insult was seeing a life in the snow and asking what it was worth dead. No one laughed this time. No one told her to lower her eyes. The wind moved through the pines, carrying her words across the yard, and Grace felt something inside her loosen, not anger exactly, but the old weight of silence. Nathaniel finished tying the cloth around her palm and looked at her as if she had just named the truth his entire kingdom needed to hear. Grace Whitmore, he said, and her name sounded different in his mouth, not small, not temporary, not unwanted. You broke a curse forged to hold a Lycan King. Do you know what that means? She shook her head. It means the power they mocked was never weakness. He turned her wrist gently toward the moonlight. Beneath the fading gold, a pale symbol appeared on her skin, shaped like a crescent wrapped around a winter rose. Marcus inhaled sharply. Even Nathaniel went still. Grace looked between them, fear returning in a whisper. What is it? Nathaniel's gaze lifted to hers, and in his silver eyes she saw awe, sorrow, and a destiny far larger than the cabin behind her. A mark lost to my bloodline for 100 years, he said. The sign of the healer who saves the crown. Grace stared at the mark on her wrist as the last of the storm broke open above Frostpine Ridge. Clouds drifted apart in slow, torn ribbons, revealing a pale moon that poured silver light over the cabin, the creek, the bowed pines, and the royal riders waiting in the snow. The crescent and winter rose glowed once, then settled into her skin as if it had always belonged there, hidden beneath years of loneliness, waiting for the one night she would choose mercy when everyone else chose fear. Derek looked at the mark and seemed to understand before Grace did that the world had turned beyond his reach. That means nothing, he said, but his voice had lost its shape. Commander Marcus Reed faced him with quiet authority. It means the Crown will investigate Silver Hollow for treason, concealment of royal injury, and denial of winter aid under pact law. The words landed heavily, not with cruelty, but with consequence. Grace did not feel joy at Derek's fear. She felt tired. She felt cold. She felt the strange ache of someone who had survived a long night and only now realized how close she had come to not surviving it at all. Nathaniel noticed before anyone else. He stepped beside her, the royal cloak still around her shoulders, and lowered his voice so only she could hear. You do not have to stand for this alone anymore. Grace looked up at him. Snow clung to his dark hair. The curse had left shadows beneath his silver eyes, but when he looked at her, there was no pity in him. Only recognition. I have been alone a long time, she whispered. I know, he said. That is why I will not ask you to become mine like a prize won in a storm. The word startled her. Around them, the royal guards waited. Silver Hollow's hunters stood silent. Derek watched as if expecting a king's command, a dramatic claim, something that would turn Grace from one kind of possession into another. Nathaniel offered none of that. Instead, he gently released her hand and stepped back far enough for everyone to see that she stood by choice. Grace Whitmore carried my life across nearly 2 miles of blizzard with no promise of reward, no protection, and no witness but the moon. She broke the curse meant to silence the crown. She spoke truth when rank tried to bury it. By the laws of the Lycan kingdom, by the old blood she awakened, and by my own vow before these witnesses, she will be honored as the woman who saved her king. A hush passed through the yard. Grace's breath caught. Honored. Not used. Not claimed without consent. Honored. Nathaniel turned to her then, and his voice softened. The bond between us woke tonight. I can feel it, and I believe you can too. But a bond is not a cage. If you come with me, you come as Grace, not as a stray I rescued, not as an omega they discarded, but as the woman who chose compassion when a kingdom failed to arrive in time. Grace felt it then, beneath the fear and exhaustion, a quiet pull like warmth through winter stone. Not force. Not demand. A path. She thought of her cabin, small and smoky and dear. She thought of little Noah, still needing medicine. She thought of her mother's words, "Not every strength has teeth," and understood at last that she had not inherited weakness. She had inherited the kind of strength that kept breathing things alive. "The child in the lower village still needs fever tonic," Grace said. Nathaniel's expression changed, touched by something almost like wonder. After curses, betrayal, and royal revelations, she was still thinking of a sick child. He looked to Marcus. "Send a healer and supplies to the village. Tonight. No one in Silver Hollow goes without aid because their leaders forgot mercy." Marcus bowed. "At once, Your Majesty." Only then did Grace step closer to Nathaniel. The bond warmed, bright but gentle, and the mark on her wrist shimmered beneath the moon. "I will come," she said, "but I want my mother's herb books brought with me." Nathaniel's mouth softened, not quite a smile, but close enough to feel like dawn. "Then they will travel under royal guard." He turned to the gathered riders and to the men who had once laughed at her from behind warm windows. His voice carried across the snow, calm and absolute. "Hear me. Grace Whitmore is not a stray. She is the healer of the crown, the breaker of cursed silver, and the Luna I choose before moon and kingdom." No one spoke. Then Marcus bowed first. One by one, the royal riders followed, knees bending into the snow. Even the Silver Hollow hunters lowered their heads. Grace stood beneath the fading storm with the cloak of a king around her shoulders and moonlight on her wrist, not healed from every hurt, not suddenly untouched by the past, but seen. Truly seen. And when Nathaniel offered his hand, she took it, not because destiny demanded it, but because for the first time in her life, destiny felt gentle.